I am Madison Wilson, 34, the only daughter of renowned architect James Wilson. I arrived at my father's while reading only to be blocked at the door by my stepmom, Beverly. She smirked and said, "Family only," despite me being Dad's only biological child. I glimpsed her two adult children inside with the lawyer. Little did Beverly know, I had the real will in my purse. Dad gave it to me before his death, and her world was about to implode. If my story about standing up to family betrayal resonates with you, I would love to hear where you're watching from. This journey through grief, deception, and ultimately justice taught me that sometimes the most painful moments lead to necessary transformation. Hit subscribe if you've ever had to fight for what's rightfully yours, and leave a like if you believe family karma eventually comes full circle. Now, let me take you back to where it all began. My childhood with my father was something out of a storybook. James Wilson wasn't just a brilliant architect with his own successful firm in Boston. He was the kind of dad who built elaborate blanket forts in the living room and took me to construction sites where his designs were coming to life. He'd lift me onto his shoulders, pointing out load-bearing walls and explaining the mathematics behind beautiful arches in terms a child could understand. "Architecture is about creating spaces for life to happen, Maddie," he would say. "Remember that." When my mother Diana died of cancer when I was 10, Dad became my whole world. For 5 years, it was just the two of us in our beautiful brownstone filled with blueprints, architectural models, and memories of Mom. Dad threw himself into being both parents, never missing a school play or parent-teacher conference despite running Wilson Architectural Design, one of the most prestigious firms in New England. Beverly Henderson entered our lives when I was 15. She was a real estate agent who met my father at a property showing for one of his commercial designs. I still remember the day Dad brought her home for dinner. She arrived with a homemade apple pie and compliments about my science fair project displayed in the hallway. At first, she seemed genuinely kind, asking thoughtful questions about my interests and telling funny stories that made Dad laugh in a way I hadn't heard since Mom died. "Your father is special, Madison," she told me one afternoon while helping me with homework. "And so are you. I hope we can be friends." 6 months later, they were married, and Beverly moved in with her 2 children from a previous marriage. Rachel was 17, quiet and artistic, while Tyler was 19, already in college, but home frequently. Our house suddenly felt different. Photos of Mom that had lined the hallway were relocated to albums, and Beverly's decorative touches transformed our home into something unrecognizable. The shift in family dynamics was subtle at first. Beverly would schedule dinners when I had after-school activities, resulting in family meals I couldn't attend. When Dad asked about my absence, she'd express disappointment, saying, "I told Madison about dinner. She must have forgotten again." I hadn't forgotten. I was never told. My father and I had always been interested in the same things: architecture, design, mathematics. I followed in his footsteps, studying architecture at MIT while living on campus, though our home was just across the Charles River. During those years, my visits home became increasingly uncomfortable. Beverly would make comments about how I was abandoning my father, despite my regular attempts to see him. "Your father was disappointed you missed his birthday dinner," she'd say, though I'd never been told about any dinner. When I confronted Dad about these miscommunications, he seemed confused. "Beverly said you had study group and couldn't make it," he'd respond, the disconnect growing between us. After graduating with honors, I joined a competing architectural firm rather than my father's company. I wanted to establish myself independently, to prove I had earned my position through talent rather than nepotism. Dad understood, but Beverly twisted my decision. "After everything your father has done for you, this is how you repay him? By working for his competition?" she'd say within earshot of Dad, planting seeds of doubt about my loyalty. As the years passed, Beverly's control over my father's life expanded. She became involved in the financial aspects of his business, suggesting new partners and directions that diverted from my father's artistic vision toward more commercial, profitable projects. The elegant, environmentally conscious designs that had been his signature were gradually replaced by cookie-cutter office buildings that maximized square footage at the expense of beauty. When I expressed concern, Dad would say, Beverly has a good head for business, Maddie. She's helping secure our future. What future? I wondered. Dad had already been successful before Beverly. His firm had designed libraries, museums, and university buildings that were celebrated in architectural journals. What was she securing, and for whom? In the last 2 years of his life, I noticed my father's health declining rapidly. His once robust frame became thin, his sharp mind occasionally foggy. When I suggested medical intervention, Beverly assured me she had the best doctors looking after him. You don't need to worry yourself, Madison. I'm taking care of everything. 3 weeks before he died, Dad called me directly, something unusual as most communications now came through Beverly. Can you meet me at the old boathouse tomorrow? Alone. His voice sounded stronger than it had in months, with an urgency that alarmed me. The boathouse by the Charles River had been our special place when I was growing up. We'd sit watching rowing teams practice while sketching building ideas. When I arrived, Dad was already there, sitting on our usual bench, looking out at the water. Maddie, he said, using my childhood nickname that I hadn't heard in years. There are things I need to tell you, things that aren't right. He handed me a sealed envelope. Don't open this until after I'm gone. Promise me. Dad, you're scaring me. What's going on? His eyes darted around, as if checking if we were being watched. Things aren't what they seem, Maddie. I've made arrangements. Just know that I've always been proud of you, and everything I've built was meant for you to carry forward. I tried to press him for details, but he shook his head. Not now. Just keep the envelope safe. Don't tell Beverly about it. 2 weeks later, my father died of a heart attack. The official cause was listed as natural causes, but nothing felt natural about losing my 58-year-old father who, despite recent decline, had always been in good health. The grief of losing my father consumed me. Each morning, I woke with that brief moment of forgetting, followed by the crushing realization that he was gone. I'd lost not only my father but my mentor and closest friend. Yet even in my deepest grief, I wasn't allowed peace. Beverly took complete control of the funeral arrangements, consulting me only as an afterthought. When I suggested displaying some of Dad's architectural models at the service, pieces that represented his life's work and passion, Beverly dismissed the idea. The funeral is about comfort for the family, Madison, not about turning it into an exhibition, she said, though Dad had always said his buildings were his legacy. The funeral itself felt like a performance directed by Beverly. She played the devastated widow perfectly, dressed in elegant black with a delicate veil, receiving condolences from Dad's colleagues and friends with graceful nods and whispered thanks. Meanwhile, I was seated in the second row, not beside the family but among distant relatives, as if I were a cousin rather than James Wilson's only child. During the reception afterward, I overheard Beverly discussing my father's firm with Lawrence Davidson, Dad's biggest competitor. Of course, we'll need to consider all options for Wilson architectural design moving forward, she said. James never properly groomed a successor. I froze mid-step. Dad had always said the firm would be mine when I was ready. He'd mentioned it as recently as last year, saying he was holding it in trust until I felt prepared to step in. After the funeral, I attempted repeatedly to contact Harold Peterson, my father's attorney who had handled his affairs for decades. Each time, I was told by his secretary that Mr. Peterson was unavailable or that Beverly had already scheduled all necessary meetings regarding James Wilson's estate. As the executor, Mrs. Wilson has requested that all communications go through her, the secretary explained apologetically. 2 days after the funeral, alone in my apartment, I finally opened the envelope Dad had given me. Inside was a formal will, dated just 3 months prior, and a handwritten letter. My dearest Madison, if you're reading this, then my suspicions were founded. I've discovered troubling things about Beverly that I can no longer ignore. Shortly after our marriage, she began isolating me from you and from friends who might question her actions. At first, I believed it was just her desire for us to build our new family, but over time, the pattern became clear. 2 years ago, I found financial documents showing large transfers from our joint accounts to offshore holdings I knew nothing about. When questioned, Beverly claimed they were investments she was making on our behalf, but further investigation revealed a pattern of financial manipulation. Asterisk more disturbing still, I have reason to believe Beverly may have been tampering with my medication. My declining health coincided with Beverly insisting on personally managing my prescriptions, and on days when I took my medication from bottles she hadn't accessed, I felt markedly better. Asterisk, I've also discovered Beverly's previous husband died under questionable circumstances, leaving her his entire estate. She is not who she claims to be. Asterisk, I've updated my will with a new attorney, Caroline Matthews, unknown to Beverly. Harold Peterson has been my attorney for years, but I've noticed his peculiar deference to Beverly in recent meetings and suspect he may be compromised. Asterisk, the enclosed will reflect my true wishes. Take it to Caroline Matthews at Matthews Legal on Tremont Street. She has all the necessary documentation to execute it properly. Asterisk, I'm sorry to place this burden on you, Maddie. Know that I love you and have always been proud of the woman you've become. Asterisk, Dad, asterisk, my hands trembled as I read and reread the letter. Questions flooded my mind, along with a growing rage. Had Beverly been slowly poisoning my father? Had she orchestrated his isolation from me? Was his death truly from natural causes? The next morning, I received a text from Beverly. Asterisk, will reading tomorrow, 2 p.m., Harold's office. Be punctual. Asterisk, the terse message contained no condolences, no acknowledgement of our shared loss, just a command, as if I were a business associate rather than family. When I arrived at Harold Peterson's office the following day, the receptionist directed me to the conference room. As I approached, I saw Beverly standing outside the door with Rachel and Tyler. All three were dressed formally in black, speaking in hushed tones that ceased abruptly when they noticed me. Madison, Beverly said with a thin smile that didn't reach her eyes. I'm afraid there's been a misunderstanding. What misunderstanding? I asked, already sensing what was coming. The will reading is for family only, she said, her voice dripping with false sympathy. Harold specifically requested immediate family. I am immediate family, I said, my voice rising despite my efforts to remain calm. I'm his daughter. Yes, well. Beverly glanced at Rachel and Tyler, who avoided eye contact with me. Harold has already explained that the will is quite straightforward. There's really no need for you to be present for the formal reading. Through the partially open door, I could see Harold Peterson shuffling papers at the head of the conference table. He glanced up, saw me, and quickly looked away. You can't do this, I said, stepping toward the door. I have a right to be here. Beverly moved smoothly to block my path. Madison, please don't make a scene. James made his wishes clear to Harold. If there's anything in the will concerning you, we'll be sure to let you know. Her voice dropped to a whisper. Though I wouldn't get my hopes up if I were you. James was very disappointed in your lack of interest in the family these past few years. The audacity of her lie struck me like a physical blow. I had been the one trying to maintain a relationship with Dad, while she systematically cut me out of his life. Mrs. Wilson, Harold called from inside. Shall we begin? Beverly gave me one last condescending look before turning to enter the conference room. Wait in reception if you must. This shouldn't take long. The door closed in my face, and I stood there, humiliated and enraged. After a moment, I turned and walked out of the building, unwilling to sit obediently in reception while my father's legacy was carved up without me. In the parking lot, I sat in my car, clutching the steering wheel as tears streamed down my face. Through my open window, I heard Beverly's voice nearby. She was standing by her Mercedes, phone to her ear, unaware of my presence several spaces away. It went perfectly, she was saying, her voice triumphant. The little architect princess isn't getting a dime. Harold followed the plan exactly. Yes, the firm, the house, the entire estate. Of course, I'll sell the architectural drawings collection. They're just gathering dust, and I've already had interest from collectors. No, she has no idea about any of it. By the time she figures it out, everything will be liquidated. My blood turned to ice. The architectural drawings she mentioned so dismissively represented my father's life work. Original sketches of his most celebrated buildings, including innovative designs that had never been built. They were irreplaceable and, to anyone who loved architecture as my father did, priceless. In that moment, I knew I had to act quickly. Beverly was already moving to erase my father's legacy and steal what he had explicitly left to me. I took out my phone and quietly recorded the remainder of her conversation, capturing her casual discussion of liquidating my father's assets and her collaboration with Harold Peterson to defraud me. As Beverly finished her call and drove away, I pulled out the will from my bag and studied it carefully. Unlike the betrayal I'd just witnessed, my father's true intentions were about to come to light. That evening, I sat at my kitchen table surrounded by documents, the will and letter from my father, notes I'd taken during Beverly's phone conversation, and a legal pad filled with questions and suspicions. I read my father's letter again, more carefully this time, noting specific details I'd missed in my initial shock. Dad mentioned Beverly's previous husband dying under questionable circumstances. I opened my laptop and began searching. Beverly Henderson wasn't a unique name, but adding details like widow and real estate narrowed the results. After an hour of searching through social media accounts and real estate licensing databases, I found her professional profile from 7 years ago, before she met my father. But I also found something unexpected. A newspaper article from a small town in Connecticut featuring a Barbara Evans whose husband, a wealthy manufacturing executive, had died suddenly of an apparent heart attack. The accompanying photo, though 10 years old, was unmistakably Beverly, with darker hair and a different name. Further digging revealed that Barbara Evans had been investigated in connection with her husband's death when traces of digoxin, a heart medication he wasn't prescribed, were found in his system. The case was eventually closed due to insufficient evidence, but Barbara Evans disappeared from public records shortly after inheriting her husband's considerable estate. I created a timeline. Barbara Evans married Robert Henderson in Connecticut, who died 3 years later. She then changed her name to Beverly Henderson, moved to Massachusetts, and eventually met my father. The pattern was chilling. I searched criminal records and found a Barbara Evans with a sealed juvenile record and later charges of fraud that were dropped when the complainant suddenly withdrew their testimony. In each case, the description matched Beverly. My phone rang, startling me from my research. An unfamiliar number. Hello. Madison Wilson? This is Caroline Matthews. I was your father's attorney for his updated will. I've been trying to reach you. My heart raced. Yes, I have the will he gave me. He said to contact you.
I've been concerned, she said.
I expected to hear from you after James passed. When I saw the obituary mentioning Harold Peterson handling the estate, I knew something was wrong. We arranged to meet the following morning at her office. I barely slept that night, my mind racing with questions and the growing certainty that my father's death might not have been from natural causes. Caroline Matthews's office was modern and bright, nothing like Harold Peterson's wood-paneled chambers with their deliberately intimidating atmosphere. Caroline herself was a sharp-eyed woman in her 50s who spoke directly and with evident concern. Your father came to me 4 months ago, she explained after reviewing the will I brought. He was very specific about keeping our meetings confidential. He suspected Beverly had compromised his regular attorney. Did he mention why he thought that? Caroline nodded. James discovered Harold had helped Beverly establish several offshore accounts without his knowledge. When confronted, Harold claimed he believed he was acting on your father's instructions through Beverly. That's absurd, I said. Dad would never hide money offshore. Precisely what he said, Caroline agreed. Your father was methodically building a case. He suspected Beverly was planning something but wanted irrefutable evidence before confronting her. She tapped the will on her desk. This document is legally sound. It was properly witnessed and notarized. Your father was of sound mind when he created it. So what happens now? I asked. Beverly has almost certainly had Harold Peterson execute a fraudulent will. We need to challenge it immediately before she can liquidate significant assets. Caroline's expression hardened. Your father also left me a sealed envelope with instructions to open it if his death occurred before he could complete his investigation into Beverly's activities. She unlocked a desk drawer and removed a large envelope. Inside were financial documents showing systematic transfers from my father's accounts to offshore holdings, medical records, and a USB drive. Your father suspected Beverly was tampering with his medication, Caroline explained as we reviewed the contents. He had independent blood tests done showing unusual levels of certain compounds. He also installed a small camera in his home office. The USB drive contained video clips of Beverly entering my father's private study when he wasn't home, accessing his safe, and most disturbingly, opening and apparently altering the contents of his medication bottles. I couldn't find words. Potentially attempted murder, Caroline finished grimly. But we need more evidence to prove it conclusively. Your father was building a case, but he died before completing it. My mind reeled with the implications. What about Harold Peterson? Is he actively involved or just manipulated by Beverly? Your father believed Harold was initially manipulated, but eventually became complicit. Harold has handled your father's affairs for decades and knows exactly what James would have wanted. If he's executing a will that cuts you out, he's knowingly participating in fraud. We spent the next 3 hours developing a strategy. Caroline would prepare legal filings to challenge the fraudulent will while I continued gathering evidence about Beverly's past and current activities. We also agreed I should attempt to access my father's house, technically still my childhood home, to search for additional evidence. As I left Caroline's office, my phone rang. The caller ID showed Rachel Henderson, Beverly's daughter and my stepsister, though we'd never been close. Madison? Can we meet somewhere private? I need to talk to you about Mom. Rachel suggested a coffee shop far from both our usual neighborhoods. When I arrived, she was already there, nervously shredding a napkin at a corner table. She looked different from the funeral, less polished, with dark circles under her eyes and her normally perfect hair pulled back carelessly. Thanks for coming, she said as I sat down. I've been wanting to call you since the funeral, but Mom watches everything I do. What's going on, Rachel? She glanced around before leaning forward. Mom's not who you think she is. She's not who any of us thought she was. What do you mean? After your dad died, I overheard her talking to Tyler about everything going according to plan. It felt wrong. Rachel's hands trembled as she lifted her coffee cup. Then I found papers in her desk, documents with different names, accounts I didn't recognize. Did you know her name used to be Barbara Evans? I asked carefully. Rachel's eyes widened. No, but that would explain. There was a passport with the name Barbara in her closet. I thought it might be fake, for some identity theft scheme. She paused. There's something else. Before she met your dad, there was another husband none of us knew about. I found wedding photos hidden in a storage box. Robert Henderson wasn't your father? I asked, surprised. No, he was. But after he died, before we moved here, there was another man. The marriage only lasted about a year. Mom never mentioned him. This was a new piece of the puzzle, another husband between Robert Henderson and my father. Another potential victim. Rachel, I need to ask you something difficult, I said. Do you know if your mother had anything to do with your father's death? She paled. I was only 14 when Dad died. Heart attack, they said. But afterward, Mom changed, became more focused, calculating. She started talking about finding a better situation for us. Rachel's voice dropped. Last week, I found a box of prescription medications in her bathroom. None of them prescribed to her, all for heart conditions or blood pressure. Some of the same medications your father took. My stomach lurched. And Tyler? What does he know? Rachel's expression hardened. Tyler knows everything. He and Mom are partners in whatever they're doing. He manages accounts for her, creates documents. He's always been Mom's favorite, willing to do anything she asks. Why are you telling me this now? I asked. Because it's wrong, Rachel said simply. Your father was kind to me. He helped me apply to art school, encouraged me when Mom said it was a waste of time. He didn't deserve what happened to him. She pulled a flash drive from her pocket and slid it across the table. Bank statements, conversations I recorded, photos of documents. I don't know if it helps, but it's everything I could gather. As we parted ways, Rachel grabbed my arm. Be careful, Madison. Mom is dangerous when cornered. And now that she has what she wanted, there's nothing to stop her from eliminating loose ends. The warning sent a chill down my spine. I was no longer just fighting for my inheritance. I was potentially dealing with a woman who had murdered multiple husbands for financial gain. And I had just become her biggest obstacle. Caroline Matthews's office became my second home over the next 2 weeks as we meticulously built our case against Beverly and Harold Peterson. The evidence from Rachel proved invaluable, providing internal financial records that Beverly had kept hidden from my father. These transfers, Caroline said, pointing to a series of transactions, coincide exactly with the periods your father reported feeling most ill. She was moving money each time she escalated her tampering with his medication. We spread documents across Caroline's conference table, financial records showing Beverly had established a complex network of shell companies, medical records indicating my father's inexplicable health decline, Beverly's history under various names. And, perhaps most damning, a timeline of suspicious deaths connected to her. Robert Henderson, Beverly's second husband and Rachel's father, died of an apparent heart attack, I explained, organizing our evidence. Before him, there was Edward Evans, who also died of heart failure. And now we've identified a third husband between Robert and my father, Philip Gladstone, who disappeared during a boating accident but whose body was never recovered. 3 husbands, 3 substantial inheritances, 3 different identities, Caroline summarized. And now James makes 4. We need more evidence about my father's medication, I said. The videos show her tampering with his pills, but we need proof of what substance she was using. Caroline nodded. I've engaged a private investigator, Samuel Reeves. He specializes in cases involving financial crimes and has contacts in law enforcement. Samuel Reeves turned out to be a former detective with 30 years' experience, now working privately. His methodical approach helped organize our scattered evidence into a compelling narrative of Beverly's crimes. Your stepmother has been careful, he observed after reviewing our materials. She changes just enough details between identities to avoid immediate connection. Different regions, different social circles, different types of wealthy men. But the pattern is consistent. What about Harold Peterson? I asked. How involved is he? Based on the documents we've reviewed, he began as an unwitting accomplice, Samuel explained. Beverly manipulated him, using your father's name. But at some point, probably when your father confronted him about the offshore accounts, he must have realized what was happening. Instead of coming clean, he appears to have struck a deal with Beverly. He betrayed a 30-year friendship for money, I said bitterly, remembering how Harold had been a fixture at family celebrations throughout my childhood. People's true characters are revealed when significant money is involved, Samuel said. Now, we need to determine our approach. Do we go directly to authorities with what we have, or set a trap to gather more conclusive evidence? The question lingered as I drove to my childhood home later that day. Using the key I'd kept all these years, I entered when I knew Beverly would be at a charity luncheon, one of many social events she'd joined to establish herself in Boston society. The house felt different. Beverly had redecorated extensively since my father's death, erasing much of his presence. I went directly to his study, which had already been partially packed up. Many of his architectural books were gone, and the walls where his framed designs had hung showed lighter rectangles against the faded paint. I searched methodically, checking the hidden compartment behind his bookshelf where he'd kept important documents throughout my childhood. Empty. The safe in his closet had been cleared out as well. Beverly had been thorough. As I was about to leave, frustrated by the lack of discoveries, I noticed something odd about the antique drafting table my father had used since before I was born. One of the decorative wooden panels along its side appeared slightly misaligned. I pressed it gently, and it clicked, revealing a narrow, hidden drawer. Inside was a leather journal I'd never seen before and a small recording device. The journal contained my father's private thoughts over the last year of his life, documenting his suspicions about Beverly, his declining health, and most painfully, his regret at not recognizing her true nature earlier. I fear I've put Madison at risk by bringing this woman into our lives. Asterisk, he'd written. Everything I've built was meant for her, and now I must find a way to protect her from Beverly's schemes. The recording device contained audio files. Conversations between my father and Beverly, including one particularly damning exchange where she inadvertently revealed knowledge of his previous 2 marriages, information that hadn't been public and that she'd previously denied knowing. This new evidence strengthened our case considerably, but Samuel Reeves cautioned against moving too quickly. Beverly is expecting some kind of challenge from you, he advised during our next meeting. She'll have prepared for direct legal action. What she won't expect is for you to know everything about her past identities, about Tyler's involvement, about Harold's complicity. So, what do you suggest? Caroline asked. A strategic confrontation where she believes she has the upper hand, Samuel said. People like Beverly confess when they think they're untouchable, when they want to gloat about their cleverness. Over the next few days, we crafted a careful plan. Through Rachel, we learned that Beverly was hosting a dinner at my father's house, now her house, according to the fraudulent will, for potential buyers of his architectural firm. Harold Peterson would be there, along with Lawrence Davidson, my father's chief competitor who is interested in acquiring Wilson Architectural Design. That's our moment, I said. When she's celebrating her victory, surrounded by the people helping her dismantle my father's legacy. Caroline prepared all necessary legal documents to invalidate the false will and reinstate my father's true last testament. Samuel Reeves coordinated with trusted contacts in law enforcement to be ready to move once we had Beverly's confession. Rachel agreed to wear a recording device to capture any incriminating statements before my arrival. The evening before our planned confrontation, I sat alone in my apartment, reviewing everything we discovered. The woman my father married had systematically targeted wealthy men, isolated them from family and friends, slowly poisoned them, and inherited their estates, only to repeat the pattern with her next victim. My father had been just another target in her deadly scheme. I thought back to all the missed dinners, the miscommunicated messages, the gradual estrangement from my father, all orchestrated by Beverly to isolate him. I remembered his confusion when I mentioned events Beverly had told me he didn't want me to attend, and his hurt when Beverly convinced him I was too busy for family gatherings. The manipulation had been so subtle, so gradual that neither of us recognized it until it was almost too late. My father had finally seen through her deception, but not in time to escape her deadly plan. Tomorrow, I would face the woman who murdered my father and tried to steal my inheritance. I would expose her crimes and reclaim my father's legacy. But most importantly, I would ensure Beverly Henderson, or whatever her real name might be, could never harm another family again. As the gravity of what we were about to do settled over me, I realized that this wasn't just about inheritance or justice anymore. This was about honoring my father by protecting others from Beverly's predatory schemes. Dad had given me the tools to expose her, and tomorrow, I would finish what he started. I know many of you watching have faced betrayal from those who should have protected you. The journey I'm about to share next shows how sometimes we must summon courage we didn't know we had. If you're finding value in my stories so far, consider subscribing to hear more accounts of standing up to family injustice. Each like helps others find these stories who might need to hear they're not alone in their struggles. Now, let me continue with what happened when I finally confronted the woman who thought she had taken everything from me. The evening of Beverly's celebration dinner arrived with perfect clarity, one of those crisp autumn nights that New England does so well. I dressed carefully in a charcoal gray suit my father had given me when I graduated from architecture school. For when you need to command a room, he'd said, tonight would certainly qualify. Caroline Matthews and I sat in her car down the street from my childhood home, now illuminated with warm light that spilled onto the lawn. Luxury cars lined the driveway, Harold Peterson's Audi, Lawrence Davidson's Tesla, and several others belonging to potential investors Beverly had courted. Rachel just texted, Caroline said, checking her phone. Beverly's making her pitch to sell the firm. Everyone's in the dining room. Harold has the paperwork ready. My heart pounded. They're not wasting any time. They want to move quickly before anyone questions the will, Caroline agreed. Are you ready? I touched the folder containing my father's true will and the evidence we'd gathered. As ready as I'll ever be. We approached the house quietly. Rachel had left the side door unlocked as planned. We could hear Beverly's voice from the dining room as we entered. James built a remarkable regional firm, she was saying, but I believe Wilson Architectural Design has potential far beyond what he envisioned. With the right leadership and investment, its portfolio could be leveraged nationally. The casual dismissal of my father's intentionally boutique approach to architecture, his commitment to personally overseeing each project rather than expanding for profit's sake, made my blood boil. The original Wilson sketches alone are worth millions to collectors, Beverly continued. I've already had inquiries from museums and private collectors eager to acquire them. I stepped into the dining room doorway, Caroline beside me. Those sketches aren't yours to sell, Beverly. They never were. Every head turned. Beverly's champagne glass froze halfway to her lips. Harold Peterson's face drained of color. Rachel, seated at the far end of the table, gave me a barely perceptible nod. Madison, Beverly recovered quickly, her smile brittle. What an unexpected surprise. We're in the middle of a private business dinner. A dinner about selling my father's company and his life's work, I said, stepping fully into the room. Strange that his only child and heir wasn't invited. Lawrence Davidson shifted uncomfortably in his seat. The other guests, potential investors, I assumed, exchanged confused glances. Perhaps there's been a misunderstanding, Beverly said smoothly. James's was quite clear about the disposition of his assets. Yes, it was, I agreed. Just not the will you had Harold execute. I placed my folder on the table and extracted my father's true will. This is my father's actual last testament, properly executed and witnessed 3 months before his death. Harold Peterson stood abruptly. This is inappropriate, Madison. If you have concerns about the will, your attorney should contact me directly rather than disrupting a private gathering. My attorney is right here, I said, gesturing to Caroline. Caroline Matthews, who my father retained when he discovered you were helping Beverly establish offshore accounts without his knowledge. The room fell silent. Beverly's composure slipped momentarily before she forced another smile. Madison is understandably emotional after losing her father. But these accusations are completely unfounded. Are they? I turned to face the assembled guests. Did Beverly mention that she's been married at least 4 times? That each husband died unexpectedly, leaving her wealthy? That she's operated under at least 3 different names that we've discovered so far? That's absurd, Beverly snapped, her veneer cracking. Harold, I think Madison should leave before she embarrasses herself further. Actually, Caroline interjected, placing a laptop on the table, we have extensive documentation. She opened the computer and turned it to face the group. Barbara Evans, whose husband died of heart failure in Connecticut. Beverly Henderson, whose husband, Rachel's father, also died of heart failure. Philip Gladstone's wife Beatrice, who collected his life insurance after he disappeared at sea. And now James Wilson's widow, set to inherit everything after his sudden heart attack. This is slander, Beverly hissed, but I could see the calculations happening behind her eyes as she realized how much we knew. We also have evidence that you tampered with my father's medication, I continued. He suspected what you were doing and documented it extensively. Tyler, who had been silent until now, stood up so forcefully his chair toppled backward. You can't prove any of this. Mom, don't listen to them. They're just trying to scare you into giving her part of the estate. Be quiet, Tyler, Beverly said sharply, her eyes never leaving mine. Oh, we have proof, I said. Dad installed cameras in his study after he became suspicious. We have footage of Beverly tampering with his heart medication. We have his blood tests showing compounds that weren't prescribed to him. And we have these, Caroline added, producing the audio recordings my father had hidden in his drafting table. James documented everything in the months before his death. Harold Peterson had gone ashen. Beverly, if there's any truth to this, we need to pause these proceedings immediately. There's no truth to it, Beverly insisted, but her confident facade was crumbling. This is a desperate attempt by Madison to claim what James clearly didn't want her to have. I played one of the audio recordings, my father's voice filling the room as he secretly captured Beverly discussing their finances. The offshore accounts will be untraceable. Asterisk, Beverly's voice said clearly. Asterisk, just like with Robert and Edward. Once everything's transferred, we'll accelerate the timeline. Asterisk, what timeline? Asterisk, my father asked. For your retirement, darling. You work too hard. Asterisk, the recording ended, and the silence in the room was deafening. You recorded me without my knowledge? Beverly said, attempting outrage, but unable to hide her growing panic. That's illegal. Massachusetts is a one-party consent state for recordings, Caroline pointed out. James was well within his rights to record his own conversations. Lawrence Davidson stood. I think I should excuse myself from this situation. Please stay, Mr. Davidson, I said. There's more you should hear, especially since you are about to purchase stolen property. Caroline produced the legal documents we'd prepared. This is an emergency injunction preventing any sale or transfer of James Wilson's assets pending full investigation of the circumstances surrounding his death and the fraudulent will. Harold Peterson reached for the papers with trembling hands. Beverly, if you misled me about James's wishes. Don't be ridiculous, Harold, Beverly snapped. She's bluffing. There's no evidence of any wrongdoing. Then perhaps you can explain these, I said, placing Rachel's flash drive on the table. Financial records showing systematic transfers from my father's accounts to shells controlled by Tyler. Prescriptions for cardiac medications in multiple names, all found in your bathroom. Email correspondence between you and Harold discussing how to handle Madison after my father's death. Tyler lunged toward the flash drive, but one of the dinner guests, a former colleague of my father's, blocked his path. Mom, we need to leave. Now, Tyler urged, his eyes wild. Rachel finally spoke, her voice quiet but clear. It's over, Mom. I gave Madison everything I found in your office. The passports, the account numbers, the medications. Beverly turned to her daughter, betrayal flashing across her face. You had no right to go through my personal things. You killed James, Rachel said simply. Just like you killed Dad. I suspected it for years, but I couldn't prove it until now. Beverly's composure finally shattered completely. You ungrateful little. She caught herself, suddenly aware of the room full of witnesses. These are all misunderstandings. James changed his will because Madison abandoned him for a competing firm. Everything I did was with his knowledge, including administering digoxin, a medication he wasn't prescribed. I asked, the same compound found in your previous husband's system after his death? A sharp knock at the front door interrupted the tense standoff. Samuel Reeves entered the dining room, accompanied by 2 police detectives. Beverly Henderson, one detective said, we'd like to ask you some questions regarding the death of James Wilson. Tyler made a sudden break for the side door, but was intercepted by a 3rd officer waiting outside. This is harassment, Beverly declared, but her voice had lost its authoritative edge. Harold, do something. Harold Peterson, however, was already speaking quietly to one of the detectives, his face grave. Self-preservation had clearly become his priority. As the police began questioning Beverly and Tyler separately, Caroline handed me the true will. Would you like to do the honors? I opened the document and began reading aloud my father's actual wishes. Wilson Architectural Design was to remain intact, with me as the principal owner. The house, my childhood home, was left to me, along with the majority of his assets. Beverly would receive only the legal minimum required by state law for a spouse. Most meaningfully, my father had included a video message to be played at the will reading, a message Beverly and Harold had suppressed. Caroline connected the laptop to the dining room's display screen, and suddenly my father's face appeared, recorded in his study months before his death. Madison, he began, his eyes clear and determined despite his evident frailty. If you're watching this, then my suspicions about Beverly were correct. I'm sorry for the pain this must be causing you. Know that everything I built thinking of you carrying it forward someday. The firm, the house, my designs, they're your inheritance not just financially, but spiritually. You understand what architecture means beyond profit margins and square footage. You understand that we shape spaces for people's lives to unfold within them. Tears streamed down my face as I watched him speak. The father I knew returned to me in these final words. I made a terrible mistake in trusting Beverly, he continued. Don't blame yourself for not seeing through her deception sooner. She's fooled many before us. What matters now is preserving what we value: integrity, creativity, and purpose in our work. I'm proud of you, Maddie. I've always been proud of you. As the video ended, Beverly was being led from the room by detectives, her face a mask of cold fury. Tyler followed, already bargaining, offering information in exchange for leniency. Rachel remained seated, tears streaming down her face, tears of relief, perhaps, that the truth was finally exposed. Harold Peterson approached me cautiously. Madison, I want you to know that initially I truly believed I was acting on your father's instructions through Beverly. By the time I realized the truth, I was already implicated. I was a coward. He placed a set of keys on the table. The office keys. Everything is as your father left it. I couldn't bring myself to respond to his attempt at redemption. His betrayal of my father's trust after decades of friendship was unforgivable. As the police finished gathering preliminary statements and the stunned dinner guests departed, I stood alone in my childhood home, feeling my father's presence return to the spaces Beverly had tried to erase him from. The battle wasn't over. There would be investigations, legal proceedings, perhaps even criminal trials. But tonight, the truth had finally begun to emerge. Caroline touched my arm gently. Your father would be proud, Madison. You finished what he started. I nodded, unable to speak through the complex emotions washing over me. Grief for my father, anger at Beverly's betrayal, relief that her deadly scheme had been exposed, and a strange, sad compassion for Rachel, caught between loyalty to her mother and her own moral compass. Samuel Reeves approached with an evidence bag. We found these in Beverly's personal safe. I thought you might want to see them before they go into evidence. Inside were my father's original sketches for the library that had established his reputation, his first major commission, and the project he had always been most proud of. We'll get them back to you as soon as the investigation allows, Samuel promised. As the house emptied of police and witnesses, I walked through the rooms of my childhood home, reacquainting myself with the spaces that held so many memories. In my father's study, now partially dismantled by Beverly's hasty attempts to erase his presence, I sat at his drafting table and ran my fingers over the worn wood where his hands had created so many beautiful buildings. We did it, Dad, I whispered. She didn't win. The weeks following the confrontation at my father's house unfolded like a complex architectural project, structural elements being established, foundation work happening below the surface, and occasional unexpected challenges requiring adaptation. The difference was that this project wasn't creating a building, but rather rebuilding justice and reclaiming my father's legacy. Beverly and Tyler were arrested that night on multiple preliminary charges: fraud, embezzlement, and pending investigation into my father's death. Harold Peterson wasn't arrested, but he faced disbarment proceedings for his role in executing a fraudulent will and potential criminal charges for conspiracy. I moved back into my childhood home, a bittersweet homecoming. The house held so many memories of my father, but it also bore Beverly's alterations, changes I began systematically reversing. I rehung my father's architectural drawings in his study, restored my mother's photographs to the hallway, and slowly reclaimed the spaces that had been mine growing up. Caroline Matthews helped me navigate the legal labyrinth of reclaiming my father's estate. Wilson Architectural Design had been days away from being sold off in pieces to competitors. Beverly had already begun transferring ownership of various assets, requiring legal action to freeze transactions and revert ownership. She was remarkably efficient, Caroline noted as we reviewed Beverly's financial maneuvers. Within 3 weeks of your father's death, she had already begun dismantling everything he built. The architectural firm presented its own challenges. Employees were uncertain about the future, clients were concerned about ongoing projects, and competitors were circling, hoping to poach talent during the transition. I took a leave of absence from my own job to focus on stabilizing my father's company. My first day at Wilson Architectural Design was intimidating. Though I'd grown up visiting the offices and knew many of the senior architects, I was now entering as the owner rather than James Wilson's daughter. The staff gathered in the conference room, faces reflecting varying degrees of concern and curiosity. I know the past month has been unsettling. I began, standing where my father had presided over countless meetings. Beverly Henderson's attempts to sell the firm created unnecessary uncertainty. I want to be clear, Wilson Architectural Design is not for sale. It will continue operating according to the principles my father established. Relief visibly washed over many faces. Martin Chun, my father's right-hand designer for 15 years, spoke up. Beverly told us James wanted the firm liquidated. She said he'd lost confidence in the company's direction. That was a lie, I said firmly. My father's actual will and personal messages make it clear he wanted the firm to continue with me at the helm. I'll be working with each of you to ensure a smooth transition and to honor ongoing client commitments. Gradually, the firm stabilized. I discovered my father had been working on several innovative designs that Beverly had tried to shelve in favor of more commercially reliable projects. With the team's support, I revived these designs, particularly a sustainable community center that embodied my father's belief that architecture should serve the greater good. At home, the process of discovery continued. One evening, while reorganizing my father's closet, I found a hidden panel similar to the one in his drafting table. Behind it was a small safe containing a thumb drive and a handwritten note. For the authorities, if anything happens to me. The drive contained meticulous documentation of Beverly's activities, financial records, medical anomalies, and a detailed timeline of his declining health correlated with Beverly's access to his medication. Most disturbingly, it contained research on Beverly's previous husbands, including newspaper clippings about their deaths and evidence my father had gathered suggesting a pattern of targeting wealthy men, isolating them, and then engineering their natural deaths. I immediately turned this evidence over to the detective handling my father's case. Your father was building a comprehensive case, Detective Morales explained after reviewing the files. If he hadn't died when he did, he might have taken this evidence to us himself. She killed him before he could expose her, I said. The reality of how calculated my father's murder had been hitting me anew. Based on this and the evidence we've gathered from Beverly's residence, we're upgrading the charges to include first-degree murder, Detective Morales confirmed. We're also reopening investigations into the deaths of Robert Henderson and Edward Evans. Meanwhile, Beverly's carefully constructed facade continued to crumble as her past came to light. Financial forensics uncovered at least 2 additional identities we hadn't previously discovered, along with suspicious deaths connected to each. What had begun as an inheritance dispute was evolving into an investigation of a possible serial Black Widow who had operated across multiple states for over 15 years. 3 weeks after the arrests, I received an unexpected call from Rachel. "Can we meet?" she asked, her voice strained. "There are things I need to tell you." We met at the same coffee shop as before. Rachel looked both exhausted and somehow lighter, as if the burden of secrets had been partially lifted from her shoulders. "I've been cooperating with investigation," she said after we sat down. "Telling them everything I know about Mom's patterns, Tyler's involvement, all of it." She stared into her coffee cup. "I knew something was wrong for years, but I never wanted to believe my own mother could be what she is." "When did you first suspect?" I asked. "When I was 16, I overheard her talking to Tyler about the plan shortly before my dad died. After his death, she completely transformed. Different hair, different clothes, different personality almost. Within months, we'd moved to Boston, and suddenly she was Beverly Henderson, sophisticated real estate agent. Rachel's testimony proved invaluable to the prosecution, though the emotional cost to her was evident. She testified against both her mother and brother, providing crucial insights into their methodology and confirming that Beverly had followed the same pattern with my father as with her previous victims. I found myself in an unexpected position regarding Rachel. We'd never been close as stepsisters, largely due to Beverly's manipulation, but now we shared a unique bond as victims of the same predator. She had lost both her father and mother to Beverly's schemes, her father to death, and her mother to the revelation of her true nature. "What will you do now?" I asked her after a particularly grueling day of providing statements to prosecutors. "Start over," she said simply. "Change my name, maybe. Go back to art school like your dad encouraged me to do." She hesitated. "I know I have no right to ask, but I was wondering if you might help me with that." "Not financially," she added quickly. "Just advice, maybe. You're the only person who understands what this has been like." I surprised myself by agreeing. Despite our complicated history, Rachel had shown tremendous courage in standing against her mother and brother. In a way, she had lost even more than I had. As summer turned to fall, the legal proceedings against Beverly, Tyler, and Harold Peterson continued to advance. Beverly maintained her innocence, but the evidence against her was overwhelming. Tyler, ever self-serving, began cooperating with prosecutors in exchange for reduced charges, providing details about how he had helped his mother establish false identities and manage illegally obtained funds. Harold Peterson faced disbarment hearings and potential criminal charges for his role in executing a fraudulent will. His reputation in tatters, he offered a full confession, admitting that Beverly had initially manipulated him but that he had eventually become a willing accomplice, enticed by promises of significant payment for his cooperation. The media caught wind of the story, dubbing Beverly the Black Widow of Boston. Reporters began connecting her to unsolved suspicious deaths across the Northeast, and previous investigations were reopened. I declined most interview requests, focusing instead on rebuilding my father's firm and establishing a foundation in his name to support architectural education for underprivileged students, a cause he had always championed quietly. One afternoon, while reviewing client files at the firm, I received a call from Detective Morales. "We found something in Beverly's storage unit that you should see," she said. "Can you come to the station?" The storage unit, rented under yet another alias, had contained a trove of incriminating evidence: multiple passports, financial records, and most disturbingly, souvenirs from each of her victims, items small enough not to be missed but significant enough to serve as trophies. From my father, she had taken his MIT class ring, which I had assumed was lost during his illness. She kept mementos from each victim, Detective Morales explained, showing me the carefully labeled boxes. "It's common with serial offenders, a way of revisiting their crimes." As I held my father's ring, restored to me after being treated as evidence, the full weight of Beverly's predatory nature became clear. She hadn't just killed for money. She had collected lives, identities, and families as if they were architectural models to be displayed and then discarded. The preliminary hearing was scheduled for early December. The prosecution had built a formidable case combining financial evidence, medical testimony, and Beverly's pattern of behavior across multiple identities. Tyler's testimony against his mother further strengthened their position, though his own charges remained significant. The morning of the hearing, I stood on the courthouse steps, Rachel beside me, as reporters called out questions. I had prepared a brief statement with Caroline's help, focusing not on Beverly's crimes, but on my father's legacy. James Wilson was a visionary architect who believed in creating spaces that elevated the human experience, I told the assembled press. His work will continue through the firm he built and the foundation established in his name. While we seek justice for his death, the true tribute to his life lies in carrying forward his commitment to architecture that serves community needs. As cameras flashed and questions continued, I felt a strange sense of closure beginning to form. Beverly would face justice, my father's legacy was secured, and I was finding my own path forward, not just as James Wilson's daughter, but as an architect in my own right, shaped by both his influence and the hard lessons of the past year. Inside the courtroom, Beverly appeared diminished without her carefully cultivated image of sophistication. She avoided eye contact as the judge read the extensive list of charges against her. Tyler, seated separately with his own attorney, looked young and frightened, a far cry from the arrogant stepbrother who had helped scheme against my father. As the legal proceedings moved forward, I divided my time between running the architectural firm, restoring my father's home, and establishing the James Wilson Foundation. The work became a form of healing, a way to channel grief into purpose. Each project completed according to my father's vision, each scholarship awarded in his name, felt like reclaiming a piece of what Beverly had tried to steal. Rachel, too, found her path forward, enrolling in art school and beginning therapy to process the complex trauma of her family history. Our relationship evolved into an unexpected friendship built on shared experience and mutual respect. In a strange way, Beverly's crimes had created a genuine family bond where her manipulation had previously prevented one. By the time winter settled over Boston, painting the city in crystalline white, the justice system was moving deliberately toward trial. The preliminary evidence was deemed more than sufficient to proceed with charges including multiple counts of murder, fraud, identity theft, and financial crimes. Beverly's carefully constructed house of cards had collapsed completely, revealing the predator beneath the polished exterior. As I stood in my father's study on the anniversary of his death, surrounded by his designs and the evidence of his creative life, I felt his presence more strongly than I had since before Beverly entered our lives. The woman who had tried to erase him had instead ensured that his legacy would be preserved and protected with even greater determination. Justice wouldn't bring my father back, but it would ensure that Beverly Henderson, or whatever her real name might be, could never harm another family. And in reclaiming my father's legacy, I had discovered my own strength and purpose, an architectural foundation as solid as any my father had ever designed. 1 year after the confrontation that exposed Beverly's crimes, I stood in the lobby of Wilson Architectural Design's newly renovated offices. The space had been transformed according to one of my father's unrealized designs, open and filled with natural light, with display areas showcasing the firm's most innovative projects. At the center was a scale model of the James Wilson Memorial Community Center, now under construction in the neighborhood where my father grew up. "Your father would love this," Martinchin said, joining me as I adjusted the position of a display panel, especially seeing his community center design finally being built. "It feels right," I agreed. Dad always said architecture should give back to the communities it serves. The past year had been a journey of reclaiming and rebuilding. The firm had not only stabilized but thrived under joint leadership. I had brought in Martin as co-director, recognizing that his 15 years of experience with my father made him an invaluable partner. Together, we had steered the company back to its founding principles, innovative design with social purpose. The trial of Beverly Henderson had concluded 3 months earlier with a verdict that surprised no one, guilty on all counts, including first-degree murder in my father's death. The evidence had been overwhelming, from the financial paper trail to the medical testimony about my father's systematically compromised medication. Most damning were the parallel cases from her previous identities. The deaths of Robert Henderson and Edward Evans showed such similar patterns that the prosecution had been permitted to present them as evidence of methodology. Beverly was sentenced to life imprisonment without possibility of parole. Tyler received 15 years for his role as accomplice, with the possibility of parole after serving 10. Harold Peterson avoided prison but was disbarred and agreed to a substantial civil settlement for his role in attempting to execute the fraudulent will. The courtroom on the day of Beverly's sentencing had been tense, with unspoken emotion. She maintained her composure until the very end, showing no remorse even as the judge delivered a scathing assessment of her crimes. Only when the sentence was pronounced did I see a flash of the real person behind the carefully constructed facade, a moment of naked rage quickly controlled, but revealing the predator who had targeted my father and so many others. I had made a point of being present for every significant moment of the trial, not out of vindictiveness, but as a representative of my father and her other victims. Rachel attended sporadically, the emotional toll of testifying against her mother and brother evident in her drawn face and nervous hands. After the sentencing, we had walked out of the courthouse together, ignoring the press clamoring for statements. "It's over," she had said simply as we stood on the courthouse steps. "The legal part is," I agreed. "The rest takes longer." Now, nearly a year after the confrontation and 3 months after the sentencing, I was finding my way forward. The James Wilson Foundation had awarded its first round of scholarships to aspiring architects from disadvantaged backgrounds. The firm was implementing several of my father's more innovative designs that Beverly had attempted to shelve. And I had finally begun to make my childhood home truly mine again, removing Beverly's decorative touches and restoring elements my father had loved. Rachel had completed her first year of art school, showing remarkable talent in architectural illustration, a skill my father had encouraged in her years earlier. We spoke regularly, our unlikely friendship one of the few positive outcomes of the entire ordeal. She had legally changed her last name, distancing herself from both Henderson and her mother's other identities, choosing instead her maternal grandmother's maiden name. One Saturday morning, I decided to visit my father's grave. I hadn't been since the funeral, finding the idea of a cemetery visit inadequate to honor a man who had lived so dynamically. But with the anniversary of his death approaching, something drew me to the quiet hillside where he rested beside my mother. The late autumn air was crisp as I placed fresh flowers by the simple headstone. "We did it, Dad," I said quietly. "Justice was served. Your firm is thriving, and the community center will break ground next month." I paused, feeling a bit self-conscious talking to a stone, yet somehow certain he could hear me. "Beverly will spend the rest of her life in prison. She can't hurt anyone else." As I turned to leave, my phone rang, Caroline Matthews calling with news that the final legal hurdles had been cleared for the James Wilson Foundation to receive its nonprofit status. Another piece of my father's legacy secured, another step forward. Back at home, I decided to finally tackle my father's personal archive, boxes of sketches and notes I had been too emotional to sort through until now. Among his professional papers, I found a sketchbook I'd never seen before, filled with designs for a house unlike any he'd built professionally. The plans were meticulous, every detail considered, with notes in the margins about natural light preferences and built-in bookshelves sized for specific volumes. Tucked inside the sketchbook was an envelope with my name written in my father's distinctive architect's block lettering. Inside was a letter dated just weeks before his death. "Maddie, asterisk if you're reading this, you've probably found the house plans. This is the home I've been designing for you since you were in architecture school, my gift for when you were ready to build your own place. Each element reflects something I know you love. The reading nook positioned for morning light, the studio with northern exposure for your drawings, the garden layout you admired in Copenhagen. Asterisk, I never showed you these plans because I wanted them to be a surprise for the right moment. I imagined us building this house together someday, father and daughter creating something permanent and beautiful. Asterisk, life doesn't always unfold as we design it. If I'm not there to build this with you, know that every line on these pages represents my love for you and my pride in the woman and architect you've become. Asterisk, the land on Cape and is already purchased in your name. Build this house or design your own. The choice is yours. But make a home that brings you joy, Maddie. That's all I ever wanted for you. Asterisk, with love. Asterisk, Dad. Asterisk, tears streamed down my face as I studied the plans more carefully, recognizing how each space had indeed been designed with intimate knowledge of my preferences and habits. The house wasn't grandiose like Beverly might have wanted. It was thoughtful, personal, and perfectly suited to me. After drying my tears, I made a decision. I would build this house, my father's final design, but with my own touches added, a collaboration across the boundary of life and death. It would be both tribute and new beginning, a place to honor the past while creating my future. Over the next several months, I worked with a small team from the firm to develop my father's sketches into construction documents. We broke ground on Cape and in the spring, and I visited the site weekly to watch my father's final design take physical form. Each beam and wall felt like a conversation with him, a shared project despite his absence. As the house neared completion in late summer, I invited Rachel to see it. We walked through the spaces, still raw with exposed framing in places, but already showing the brilliant interplay of light and structure that had been my father's hallmark. "He designed this for you," Rachel said, not a question but a recognition.
Yes.
It was meant to be a surprise. "He was a good man," she said softly. "I wish I'd had more time to know him without my mother's interference." "He thought highly of your talent," I told her. "There's a studio space here that would be perfect for architectural illustration. You're welcome to use it any time." Her surprised smile was answer enough. The day I moved into the completed house, exactly 2 years after my father's death, felt like closing one chapter and opening another. The morning light streamed through windows positioned exactly as he had planned, creating pools of golden warmth on the wooden floors. I unpacked boxes of books into shelves built to my height, arranged my drafting table in the studio he had designed, knowing exactly how I preferred to work. That evening, I sat on the deck overlooking the Atlantic, watching the same view that had inspired some of my father's most innovative designs. I thought about the journey of the past 2 years, the grief and betrayal, the fight for justice, and ultimately, the reclaiming of my father's legacy and the discovery of my own strength. Beverly had sought to erase James Wilson from the world, to reduce his life's work to assets she could liquidate. Instead, her actions had ensured his vision would continue, not just through his buildings but through the foundation bearing his name and through my commitment to carrying forward his principles of architecture as a social good. Real family, I realized, wasn't defined by legal documents or blood relations. It was built on love, respect, and shared values. A foundation far stronger than any Beverly could undermine. My father had given me not just an inheritance of property and a firm, but a legacy of integrity and purpose that Beverly could never touch. As stars appeared above the darkening ocean, I felt a sense of peace that had eluded me since my father's death. Justice had been served. Beverly would never harm another family. My father's true legacy was secure. And I had found my own path forward, shaped by his influence, but distinctly my own. The house around me, his final design, our final collaboration, stood as testament to what Beverly had failed to understand, that true value lies not in what can be sold or controlled, but in what endures through the lives we touch and the spaces we create for others to thrive. I've shared this long journey with you from betrayal to justice, and I'm grateful you stayed with me through every twist and turn. If my story resonated with you or helped you process your own family challenges, please consider subscribing to hear more stories of overcoming betrayal and finding strength. Each like and share helps someone else find these stories who might be struggling with similar family trauma. Have you ever had to stand up against family injustice or reclaim what was rightfully yours? I'd love to hear your experiences in the comments below. The community that forms around these shared stories reminds us we're never alone in our struggles. Thank you for witnessing my journey to honor my father's legacy. Subscribe for more stories about family karma and the healing that comes after standing in your truth. Life taught me that sometimes the most painful betrayals lead to our greatest moments of courage and clarity. I hope that whatever family challenges you're facing, you find the strength to fight for what matters most.